They said the crippled beggar would take her quietly. They did not expect the entire ballroom to fall silent when he raised his hand. The first thing Seraphina Valewood noticed was the smell. Burned sugar. Cheap perfume. Old money trying too hard to impress itself. The grand ballroom of Harrogate Manor glittered beneath 3 crystal chandeliers large enough to crush a carriage if they ever fell. But none of that beauty reached the girl standing alone near the auction platform. She looked down at the pale silver dress forced onto her body 2 hours earlier and wondered if humiliation always came wrapped in silk. "Stand straighter," Aunt Agnes hissed beside her. Her sharp fingernails dug into Seraphina's arm through the thin fabric. "You already look pathetic enough." Seraphina obeyed without speaking. She had learned long ago that silence survived longer than resistance. Around them, the ballroom hummed with conversation. Nobles in dark coats and jeweled gowns moved beneath candlelight with the lazy confidence of people who had never once worried about hunger or debt or whether winter would destroy them. Crystal glasses clinked softly. A violin quartet played somewhere near the staircase. Servants moved through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne no one really wanted. Tonight was supposed to be called a charity arrangement dinner. That was the polite name written on the invitations. Everyone in the room knew the truth. They were here to watch a desperate girl get sold. "Smile," Agnes whispered. "For once in your useless life, try to look grateful." Seraphina almost laughed at that. Grateful. Her father had been dead for 8 months. 8 months since the fever carried him into the grave and left behind enough debt to drown everyone attached to the Valewood name. The creditors came first. Then the lawyers. Then the whispers. Agnes had sold the horses. Sold the paintings. Sold her mother's jewelry one piece at a time until the estate looked hollowed out like a carcass picked clean by birds. And now there was only Seraphina left to barter. A man near the center of the ballroom glanced toward her and muttered something that made his wife smirk behind her fan. Seraphina looked away before she could hear the words clearly. She already knew them. Too quiet. Too plain. Too poor. Not beautiful enough to save the family properly. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice thundered through the ballroom. Conversation faded. The violin music stopped. "Tonight we gather not merely for charity, but for opportunity." Soft laughter spread through the crowd. Seraphina's stomach tightened. A raised platform stood beneath the largest chandelier, empty except for a single chair upholstered in dark velvet. The sight of it made her skin crawl. "Miss Valewood," Agnes said sharply. "Move." Seraphina's feet felt heavy as stone as she climbed the 3 small steps onto the platform. 200 eyes followed her. She kept her chin lifted anyway. If she looked broken now, they would enjoy it too much. The announcer smiled with too many teeth. "Miss Seraphina Valewood, 21 years old, educated, healthy, suitable for marriage placement." The words landed one after another like nails sealing a coffin. Somewhere in the crowd, someone chuckled. "We begin at $20,000. Silence. Seraphina stared straight ahead. Candlelight blurred around the edges of her vision. $20,000. That was apparently the price of her future. 20,000. The announcer repeated more loudly. "Any interested gentlemen?" A man near the back lifted his champagne glass. 10, he said lazily. More laughter followed. Seraphina felt heat rise slowly into her face. 10,000, the announcer corrected quickly. "Very well. Do we have 15? 12, another voice called. "She looks too fragile for more than that." The room laughed harder this time. Agnes stood near the stage smiling tightly like she could already see her debts disappearing. Seraphina wanted to leave. Wanted to run out into the freezing November night and keep running until the entire world disappeared behind her. But there was nowhere left to go. 15,000. A woman called from the left side of the ballroom. Lady Penrose. Widowed twice and cruel enough to enjoy it. Seraphina forgot how to breathe for half a second. He did not smile. Men usually smiled when they looked at women standing on auction platforms. This man looked at her the way winter looked at a field before snow. Quiet, cold, absolute. 100,000, he repeated calmly. The announcer swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. I do not believe I caught your name." The man continued forward through the ballroom. His cane struck the marble floor in slow measured clicks. Nobody moved aside quickly enough. They simply moved, instinctively, like animals sensing a storm before it arrived. "Lucian Ashbourne," he said. A nobleman near the stage went visibly pale. Another lowered his eyes immediately. Agnes straightened too fast beside the platform. "Lord Ashbourne," she breathed. Seraphina heard panic underneath the politeness. "Interesting. Very interesting." Lucian stopped directly before the platform. Up close he looked even more dangerous somehow. Not because of his size, because of the stillness. Most powerful men performed power loudly. Lucian Ashbourne carried his like a loaded weapon hidden beneath velvet. $100,000, the announcer repeated weakly. "Do I hear higher?" No one answered, not even Lady Penrose. The ballroom remained frozen in silence. Lucian's gaze never left Seraphina's face. "No," he said softly. "You do not." The announcer nodded immediately. "Sold." A strange ringing filled Seraphina's ears. Sold. Just like that. Her entire life changed in a single word. Agnes climbed the platform at once, smiling too brightly now. "Lord Ashbourne, what an extraordinary honor for our family." Lucian did not even look at her. That seemed to unsettle Agnes more than if he had insulted her openly. "Miss Valewood," he said quietly. Seraphina forced herself to meet his eyes. "Sir, you will come with me now." Not a question. A statement. Agnes laughed nervously. "Of course she will. We are deeply grateful for your generosity." Lucian finally turned his head slightly toward Agnes. Just slightly. The entire ballroom seemed to tighten around the movement. "I was not speaking to you." Agnes went silent. Completely silent. Seraphina felt something shift beneath her ribs. Not safety. Not yet. But something close to the memory of it. Lucian extended one gloved hand toward her. She stared at it for a moment too long. His hand was large, steady, scarred near the wrist beneath the black leather glove. A crippled beggar, they had called him. Yet every person in this ballroom looked ready to kneel if he asked. "Miss Valewood," he said again. His voice remained calm. That somehow made it worse. Seraphina slowly placed her trembling hand into his. Warmth closed around her fingers immediately. Firm. Certain. The ballroom erupted into whispers behind them as Lucian turned and guided her down from the platform. Seraphina heard fragments drift through the noise. "Blackmere. Impossible. I thought he never returned to society. Why would he want her?" Lucian did not react to any of it. His cane struck the marble floor in slow measured rhythms as he led her toward the entrance. Seraphina glanced back once. Agnes stood near the platform clutching her champagne glass so tightly she looked close to shattering it. For the first time all night, her aunt looked afraid. Outside, freezing wind swept across the front steps of Harrogate Manor. A long black carriage waited beneath the falling snow. For black horses stood motionless in the darkness like carved shadows. A footman opened the carriage door instantly the moment Lucian approached. Then the footman bowed his head. Not politely, reverently. "Your Grace," he said quietly. Seraphina stopped breathing. Lucian looked down at her at last. Really looked at her. "Get inside, Seraphina," he said softly, "before someone decides to kill us both." The carriage door closed with a heavy sound that reminded Seraphina of vault doors in old banks. Final. Sealed. Dangerous. Snow drifted past the darkened windows as the carriage lurched forward into the London night. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Lucian Ashbourne sat across from her beneath the dim gold light of a single lantern fixed to the carriage wall. His black cane rested beside one gloved hand. The silver wolf carved into its handle caught the light every time the carriage shifted over cobblestones. Seraphina kept her hands folded tightly in her lap to stop them from trembling. Outside, the city blurred into streaks of pale gas lamps and dark winter fog. Inside, the silence pressed against her chest like weight. She had just been sold. Married in everything except ceremony. carried away by a man everyone in London seemed terrified to name too loudly. And now she sat alone with him in a carriage that smelled faintly of leather, cedar smoke, and snow carried in from the night air. Lucien looked toward the window rather than at her. The sharp angles of his face remained unreadable beneath the moving lantern light. He looked less like a beggar now and more like something dangerous pretending to be wounded. Seraphina noticed small details she had missed before. The fabric of his coat was not cheap. Neither were the boots polished dark beneath the opposite seat. Even the silver buttons along his sleeves carried a crest she did not recognize. A crown above a wolf. Old money. Very old money. "You are staring," he said quietly. Seraphina flinched before she could stop herself. His voice was low, controlled, not cruel. Somehow that unsettled her more. "I am trying to understand," she admitted carefully. Lucien turned his head slightly then. Pale gray eyes settled on her face. Steady, cold, exhausted in ways she could not explain. "Understanding will come later," he said. "Survival comes first." The carriage rolled through another turn. Seraphina felt her stomach tighten. "Who are you really?" she asked softly. A faint sound escaped him then. Not quite laughter. Closer to memory. "That," he said, "depends on who is asking." "The woman you just purchased." His gaze sharpened at once. The atmosphere inside the carriage changed instantly. Colder somehow. "I did not purchase you. The entire ballroom watched you do exactly that." "No," Lucien leaned back slowly. "I prevented someone worse from winning." Seraphina swallowed hard. The honesty in his voice frightened her more than lies would have. Outside, snow thickened against the carriage windows. The wheels rattled across a bridge slick with ice. Somewhere far behind them, church bells rang midnight. "You called him Your Grace," she said after a moment. "The footman." Lucien did not answer immediately. He removed one glove with slow, deliberate movements. A long, pale scar crossed the back of his hand near the wrist. Another disappeared beneath his sleeve. "People call many men many things," he said at last. "That is not an answer." "No, it is not." Seraphina stared at him in disbelief. "Am I your prisoner now?" For the first time since entering the carriage, Lucien looked directly into her eyes without restraint. She almost wished he had not. There was something devastating inside his gaze. Not anger, weariness, the kind that settled into men who had survived too much. "If you were my prisoner," he said quietly, "the door would already be locked." Seraphina glanced instinctively toward the carriage handle. Lucien noticed. Of course he did. "You may leave if you wish," he said. "I will not stop you." Her chest tightened. "In the middle of a snowstorm?" "Yes." "With nowhere to go?" "Yes." The carriage fell silent again. Seraphina looked away first. Because he was right. She had nowhere left. Lucien watched her for another moment before turning back toward the window. "I dislike cages," he said quietly. "Even gilded ones." Something inside Seraphina shifted uneasily. Dangerous men were easier to survive when they behaved like monsters. Lucien Ashbourne behaved like someone trying very hard not to become one. "Then why me?" she whispered. "Why bid for me at all?" Snow struck the carriage roof softly overhead. Lucien's jaw tightened once. "Barely noticeable." "Because they were desperate enough to sell you publicly," he said. "And desperate people usually hide worse things behind closed doors." Seraphina stared at him. "You do not even know me." "I know enough." "What does that mean?" Lucien finally looked tired. Truly tired. He closed his eyes briefly as though forcing himself through pain she could not see. "It means," he said slowly, "that your aunt is lying about something important, and men have already died because of it." Cold spread through Seraphina's stomach. "What?" Before Lucien could answer, the carriage suddenly jerked hard to the left. Seraphina grabbed the seat instinctively. Outside came the sharp sound of shouting. Horses screamed somewhere ahead. The carriage stopped violently. Lucien moved instantly, faster than any injured man should have been capable of moving. His cane disappeared into his hand as he rose to his feet in one smooth motion. No limp, not even slightly. Seraphina stared at him in shock. Lucian noticed too late. Their eyes locked for one dangerous second. Then another voice shouted outside. "Your Grace!" Lucian cursed softly beneath his breath. The first real emotion she had heard from him all night. He reached into his coat and pulled out a pistol. Seraphina froze. "Stay inside the carriage," he ordered. "Do not open the door unless I return personally." Her heart slammed painfully against her ribs. What is happening? Lucian looked toward the window. Snow reflected pale light across the scar on his jaw. "Someone," he said quietly, "has decided they do not want you reaching Blackmere alive." Then he opened the carriage door and disappeared into the storm. Snow rushed through the open carriage door in sharp white spirals the moment Lucian disappeared into the night. Seraphina sat frozen beneath the dim lantern light, her pulse hammering so violently she could hear it in her ears. Outside came muffled voices, boots striking ice, the nervous shriek of horses struggling against reins. Then silence. Terrible silence. She stared at the open carriage doorway where snow drifted onto the polished black floorboards and realized something that frightened her more than the ambush itself. Lucian Ashbourne was not crippled. The man who had stepped from that carriage moved like a soldier, not a broken beggar. The cane, the limp, the careful slowness. It had all been deliberate, which meant everything else might have been a lie too. Seraphina pressed trembling fingers against the edge of the leather seat and forced herself to breathe slowly. One breath, then another. Her aunt had sold her to a stranger wearing a disguise. Outside, wind screamed down the narrow London street hard enough to rattle the carriage windows. Somewhere nearby, metal clanged sharply against stone. Seraphina flinched toward the sound before catching herself. No screams followed. No chaos. Just low voices she could not quite understand through the storm. Minutes passed, or maybe only seconds. Fear stretched time into something shapeless. Then footsteps approached the carriage again. Slow, controlled, the same measured rhythm as before. Lucian appeared in the doorway with snow dusting the shoulders of his black coat. One gloved hand gripped the silver wolf cane again. This time Seraphina noticed the faint stiffness in his right leg after all. Not false entirely, exaggerated, hidden beneath performance. Behind him stood two men on horseback wearing long dark coats lined with silver trim. Guards. Real ones. Their horses stamped restlessly against the frozen street while snow gathered along leather saddles and broad shoulders. Lucian stepped back inside the carriage and shut the door firmly behind him. Warmth vanished almost instantly with his presence. Not physical warmth. Safety. The kind people imagined around fireplaces and soft voices. Lucian carried storms indoors with him. He sat across from her again without speaking. Snow melted slowly in his dark hair beneath the lantern glow. Seraphina noticed another thing then. His breathing was heavier now, controlled carefully, like pain existed somewhere beneath his ribs and he refused to let it win publicly. "Are you hurt?" she asked before she could stop herself. Lucian looked faintly surprised by the question. "No, that was too fast to be true. I said no." His tone was not harsh, just final. The carriage lurched forward again. Outside, hoofs pounded against snow-covered streets as the riders fell into formation beside them. Seraphina looked toward the window uneasily. "Who were they?" she whispered. Lucian removed his gloves one finger at a time. "Men asking the wrong questions. About me. About us." The words settled strangely between them. Seraphina almost protested instinctively. There was no us. There was only a terrified girl trapped inside a black carriage with a man powerful enough to make ballrooms fall silent. Yet some part of her noticed he had not left her alone tonight. He could have disappeared after the auction. Could have handed her over to servants or guards or anyone else. Instead, he remained here himself. Watching, protecting, hiding things. "You knew someone would attack us," she said carefully. Lucian leaned his head back briefly against the carriage wall and closed his eyes for one short second. Exhaustion crossed his face before disappearing completely. I suspected. Why? Because too many people panic when they cannot control something. And I am the thing they cannot control? A shadow of amusement touched the corner of his mouth, then vanished almost immediately. No, he said softly. I am. The honesty of it unsettled her more than arrogance would have. Seraphina studied him silently while the carriage rolled farther away from London's crowded streets. Outside the windows, the city slowly changed. Grand townhouses gave way to factories, then warehouses, then darkness broken only by distant lanterns and bare winter trees clawing against the snow-filled sky. Where exactly is Blackmere? She finally asked. North. That is not an answer. 3 days from London in good weather. Lucian glanced toward the storm outside. Longer now. Seraphina's stomach tightened again. 3 days alone with this man. 3 days trapped between fear and curiosity and questions no one would answer honestly. She looked down at his cane resting beside him. Why pretend? She asked quietly. Lucian's expression stilled completely. Pretend what? To be weaker than you are. The carriage fell silent except for the steady rattle of wheels over frozen roads. Lucian looked toward the darkened window instead of her face. Because powerful men survive longer when people underestimate them. And women? He turned back slowly then. Women survive longer when people forget they are watching. Seraphina stared at him. For the first time all night, she felt something besides fear. Recognition. He understood survival too well for a man born into privilege. You were not born a beggar, she said softly. No, but you were not born safe either. Lucian's pale eyes sharpened slightly. She had touched something real this time. He looked away first. No, he admitted quietly. The carriage rolled onward through thickening snow. Hours seemed to pass inside the dim lantern glow. Eventually Lucian reached toward the seat beside him and pulled out a folded dark wool blanket. He placed it beside her without speaking. Seraphina blinked in surprise. I do not need. You are shivering. She had not even realized it herself. The cold had worked slowly beneath her skin while fear distracted the rest of her body. Lucian looked toward the window again before adding quietly, Take it. Seraphina hesitated only a moment before pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Warmth spread through her almost painfully fast. It smelled faintly like cedar smoke and winter air. Like him. She hated noticing that. Thank you, she murmured reluctantly. Lucian inclined his head once. Silence settled again afterward, but this time it felt different. Less like a cage. More like waiting. Somewhere near dawn. The storm finally weakened enough for pale gray light to creep across the carriage windows. Seraphina blinked awake slowly before realizing she must have drifted asleep against the corner seat without meaning to. The blanket still covered her shoulders. Across from her, Lucian remained awake. Of course he did. He sat perfectly still beneath the fading lantern light with one hand resting near the cane, watching the passing landscape through the frost-covered glass. Seraphina followed his gaze. The world outside had changed completely. Endless white fields stretched beneath the winter sky. Dark forests cut across distant hills like scars. No towns. No villages. Nothing except snow and silence. Then she saw it. Far ahead against the pale morning horizon stood something massive and black rising from the cliffs above a frozen lake. Towers. Stone walls. Iron gates. A fortress large enough to swallow cathedrals whole. Seraphina stared speechlessly. Blackmere. Lucian finally spoke without looking at her. You still have time to be afraid, he said quietly. The carriage rolled closer through falling snow while the fortress grew larger and darker against the frozen sky. Then somewhere high above the cliffs, a church bell began to ring. Once, twice, 3 times. And all along the walls of Blackmere, soldiers carrying silver wolf banners turned toward the approaching carriage and knelt. Blackmere did not look built for human beings. It looked built for war. The fortress rose from the frozen cliffs in layers of black stone and narrow towers sharp enough to pierce the pale morning sky. Snow gathered along the battlements like white ash. Massive iron gates stood open ahead of them while rows of soldiers remained kneeling in absolute silence beside the road. None of them looked toward Seraphina directly. Their eyes stayed lowered. Their silver wolf insignias gleamed faintly against dark winter coats lined with fur. The carriage rolled slowly through the gates. Seraphina pressed trembling fingers against the wool blanket still wrapped around her shoulders and tried not to stare openly. "How many people live here?" she asked quietly. Lucien did not look away from the window. "Too many." The answer unsettled her for reasons she could not explain. Inside the walls, Blackmere expanded into an entire hidden world. Stables large enough to house dozens of horses. Barracks covered in snow. Rows of lanterns still glowing against the dim gray dawn. Servants crossing courtyards with lowered heads and hurried steps. Everything moved with military precision. Controlled. Efficient. Silent. No laughter. No warmth. The entire fortress carried the feeling of a place waiting for something terrible to happen again. The carriage finally stopped beneath a stone archway tall enough for two mounted riders to pass through side by side. A line of servants already stood waiting near the entrance stairs. Men and women dressed entirely in black and silver. Every single one bowed the moment Lucien opened the carriage door. "Your Grace," they said together. Seraphina stepped down carefully into the snow. The freezing wind immediately clawed beneath her dress. Blackmere towered above her now. Up close the fortress looked even older. Weathered stone darkened by storms and centuries. Narrow windows like watchful eyes. Ivy frozen beneath layers of ice. She suddenly understood why London whispered about this place like it belonged in ghost stories. A tall older man stepped forward from the waiting servants. His white hair was neatly combed back beneath the falling snow. His face carried deep lines carved there by long years and difficult loyalties. "Welcome home, Your Grace," he said quietly. Then his eyes shifted toward Seraphina. Not unkind. Careful. "Your Grace," he repeated with the faintest hesitation. Lucien's jaw tightened almost invisibly. "This is Miss Seraphina Valewood." The older man bowed slightly toward her. "Mr. Laurent, head steward of Blackmere." Seraphina nodded uncertainly. "It is nice to meet you." Mr. Laurent's expression softened for half a second, almost pitying. "I hope one day that will be true, miss." Before she could answer, Lucien began climbing the stone stairs toward the entrance. His movements remained controlled but slower now. The stiffness in his leg had returned fully after the long journey. Not fake after all. Just hidden when necessary. Seraphina followed silently beside him while servants carried their luggage inside. The enormous front doors opened before they reached them. Warmth rolled outward instantly along with the scent of cedarwood fires and old books. The entrance hall beyond nearly stole her breath. Black marble floors reflected candlelight from iron chandeliers hanging 3 stories overhead. Dark staircases curved upward beneath vaulted ceilings painted with faded constellations. Massive portraits lined the stone walls. Generations of men and women watched from gilded frames with pale, severe faces and silver wolf crests stitched onto coats and gowns. None of them smiled. Seraphina stepped inside slowly. Her boots echoed softly across marble. The fortress was beautiful, cold, enormous, empty in ways crowded places often were not. Lucien removed his gloves as a young servant hurried forward to take his coat. The servant could not have been older than 16. His hands visibly trembled. "The physician arrived an hour ago, Your Grace," the boy whispered nervously. "And the council members are waiting in the west chamber." Lucien looked exhausted suddenly. "Later. They said it is urgent. Everything here is urgent." The sharpness beneath his calm voice made the boy immediately lower his eyes. "Yes, Your Grace." Lucien rubbed briefly at the scar near his jaw before turning toward Seraphina again. "You need rest. I need answers." Something almost dangerous flickered behind his pale eyes then. Not anger. Recognition. Most people here probably obeyed him without question. Seraphina no longer could. "You were introduced as a beggar," she said quietly. "Yet an entire fortress kneels when you arrive. Someone tried to stop us from reaching this place alive. and every person here looks terrified. Her voice lowered further. What exactly did I marry into? Silence spread through the entrance hall. Servants suddenly became very interested in avoiding eye contact. Mr. Laurent cleared his throat softly and gestured discreetly for them to leave. Within seconds the hall emptied almost entirely. Lucien watched Seraphina for a long moment without speaking. Candlelight moved across the hard lines of his face while snow continued falling beyond the tall windows behind him. Finally he said quietly, "A war." Cold spread slowly through her chest. "Against who?" "That depends on the day." Before Seraphina could press further, another voice interrupted from the staircase above. "So she is real after all." Seraphina looked upward immediately. A woman stood near the second-floor railing dressed in deep emerald silk trimmed with black fur. Beautiful in the sharp, dangerous way winter rivers were beautiful. Dark red hair framed a pale, elegant face untouched by warmth. Her eyes moved slowly across Seraphina with obvious disbelief. "Interesting," the woman murmured. "You usually bring home wounded soldiers, Lucien, not brides." Lucien's expression hardened instantly. "Go back to your rooms, Celeste." The woman smiled faintly. "Still giving orders like the world belongs to you." She descended the staircase slowly, one gloved hand trailing along the railing. Seraphina noticed the tension changing around the servants still lingering near the doorway. Fear again, but different from before. More personal. "You did not answer my letters," Celeste continued calmly. "Naturally, I became curious." She stopped several feet away from Seraphina and tilted her head slightly. "Poor thing. Does she know yet?" Lucien's voice dropped low enough to freeze the entire hall. "Enough." Celeste finally looked directly at him then. Something unreadable passed between them. Old anger. Old grief. Old wounds still breathing beneath the surface. "You should tell her before the house does," she said softly. "Blackmere never keeps secrets kindly." Then she turned and walked away across the marble floor without another word. Seraphina stared after her uneasily. "Who is she?" Lucien looked suddenly older than 38. "My sister." "She hates you." "Yes." The simplicity of the answer unsettled her more than denial would have. "Mr. Laurent stepped forward carefully then. "Your Grace," he said quietly, "the East Wing has been prepared for Miss Valewood." Lucien nodded once. "Good." Seraphina frowned immediately. "The East Wing." Mr. Laurent hesitated. Lucien answered for him. "My rooms are in the North Tower. Separate." Something dark flickered briefly through Lucien's expression. "I did not bring you here for that." Heat rose unexpectedly into Seraphina's face. She hated that her body still knew embarrassment after everything that had happened. Lucien seemed to notice. His voice softened by the smallest degree. "You are exhausted," he said quietly, "and frightened." "I am not frightened." One of his eyebrows lifted faintly. Seraphina exhaled sharply. "Fine. Slightly frightened." To her surprise, the corner of Lucien's mouth almost moved. "Almost. That is probably wise." Mr. Laurent stepped beside her gently. "If you will follow me, miss." Seraphina hesitated before moving. Some instinct kept her standing there another moment, watching Lucien. He remained near the center of the vast marble hall beneath the chandeliers and portraits and endless stone. Alone somehow despite commanding an entire fortress. Tired enough now that the effort of hiding it had begun to crack around the edges. Then a servant approached him quickly carrying a sealed envelope. Lucien opened it immediately. Seraphina watched the color disappear from his face line by line. Not fear. Worse. Expectation. Like bad news had simply arrived on schedule. Slowly he folded the letter once more. "Lock the west gate," he ordered quietly. Every servant in the hall stiffened instantly. "No one enters or leaves Blackmere without my permission." Seraphina felt cold settle deep beneath her skin as Lucien finally lifted his eyes toward the storm-dark windows beyond the hall. "They found us faster than I expected," he said softly. And somewhere high above the fortress, a warning bell began to ring. The warning bell rang across Blackmere for nearly 3 minutes before silence finally swallowed the fortress again. Not normal silence. Waiting silence. The kind that settled over battlefields before storms broke open. Seraphina followed Mr. Laurent through endless stone corridors lit by iron wall sconces and struggling candlelight. The deeper they moved into the fortress, the colder it became. Not from temperature alone. Blackmere carried grief in its walls. She could feel it. Portraits watched from dark corners with hollow eyes and severe mouths. Thick carpets muted their footsteps. Somewhere far below, wind howled through unseen courtyards like something alive. "Does the bell ring often?" she asked quietly. Mr. Laurent kept walking beside her with measured steps. "More often lately." "Why?" The steward hesitated before answering carefully. "Because His Grace has many enemies." Seraphina glanced back down the corridor they had left behind. Lucien remained somewhere in that vast fortress dealing with letters and warnings and whatever war waited beyond the gates. The thought unsettled her unexpectedly. She barely knew the man. Yet Blackmere already felt different when he was not near. Colder somehow. "And now," Mr. Laurent added softly, "so do you." Her stomach tightened. They climbed another staircase lined with tall stained glass windows blurred by falling snow outside. Pale winter light painted fractured colors across the stone floor beneath their feet. "Why did he bring me here?" she asked after a long silence. Mr. Laurent's expression became unreadable. "That is not my story to tell. Everyone keeps saying things like that. Because some truths become dangerous when spoken too early." Seraphina exhaled quietly in frustration. "I am tired of being treated like a child hidden from difficult conversations." "Then you are already adapting to Blackmere faster than expected." The faint dryness beneath his voice startled her enough to almost smile. Almost. They reached the east wing at last. Massive oak doors opened into a quieter part of the fortress where the ceilings lowered slightly and the atmosphere shifted from military precision to something softer. Warmer fireplaces. Dark blue carpets instead of black. Tall windows overlooking the frozen cliffs and lake below. "This wing belonged to the Duchess once," Mr. Laurent said carefully. Seraphina slowed immediately. "The Duchess." The steward's jaw tightened almost invisibly. "His Grace's mother." Relief moved through Seraphina so suddenly she nearly laughed at herself. She had not even realized another possibility had already begun haunting her thoughts. Mr. Laurent stopped before a pair of carved walnut doors. "These rooms are yours now." Two maids waiting nearby immediately curtsied. One older with gentle brown eyes. The other younger and visibly nervous. "Miss Valewood," the older woman said kindly. "I am Mrs. Alden. We prepared a bath and fresh clothing for you." Seraphina stepped slowly inside the suite and stopped short. The rooms were enormous. Not gaudy like Harrogate Manor. Elegant in an older, quieter way. A fire crackled inside a marble fireplace large enough to stand inside comfortably. Floor-length curtains framed towering windows overlooking endless white cliffs beyond the frozen lake. Shelves of leather-bound books lined one wall. Fresh flowers rested in silver vases despite the middle of winter. White roses. She stared at them in confusion. Who arranged this? Mrs. Alden glanced downward politely. His Grace instructed the rooms personally. Something about that unsettled Seraphina more than if the rooms had been cold and neglected. Lucien Ashbourne had expected her arrival carefully enough to choose flowers. "Miss?" the younger maid asked timidly. "Would you like help changing?" Seraphina blinked back to herself. "No. Thank you." The maids quietly withdrew after preparing hot water near the fireplace. Mr. Laurent lingered near the doorway another moment. "The west corridors are restricted after dark," he said carefully. "If you hear bells during the night, remain inside your rooms." Seraphina frowned immediately. That is not reassuring. It was not intended to be. Then he bowed slightly and left her alone. Silence settled heavily once the doors closed behind him. Seraphina moved slowly farther into the suite. Exhaustion dragged at her body now that the journey had ended. Yet her mind refused rest. Too many unanswered questions crowded together beneath her skin. She removed her gloves beside the fire and noticed her hands still trembling faintly. Lucien's words returned to her then. "You still have time to be afraid." She looked toward the frozen cliffs beyond the windows. Too late for that now. The bath water steamed softly near the fireplace. Seraphina changed slowly into a dark blue gown left across the bed and finally allowed herself the luxury of warmth for the first time in days. Heat loosened tension from her shoulders while snow drifted endlessly outside the glass. But even inside the quiet suite, Blackmere never truly slept. Distant footsteps echoed faintly through hidden hallways. Doors opened and shut somewhere below. Once she heard men arguing far away beneath the floorboards. Another time the warning bell rang once more before abruptly stopping. Hours passed before hunger finally drove her from the bedroom toward the adjoining sitting room. A tray of untouched food waited near the fire. Fresh bread, soup, tea still warm beneath silver covers. Seraphina sat carefully beside the window and forced herself to eat slowly despite the knot in her stomach. Halfway through the meal, she noticed something strange. A narrow door partially hidden beside one bookshelf. She had not seen it earlier. Curiosity stirred immediately. Blackmere seemed built entirely from secrets. Seraphina crossed the room quietly and pressed her hand against the handle. Locked, of course. Yet something about the hidden door bothered her instantly. Not fear exactly. Familiarity. She looked closer. Dust covered most of the carved wood except near the lock itself. Recently used. Very recently. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Seraphina stepped back quickly. Mrs. Alden entered carrying folded blankets. "Forgive me, miss. I did not mean to startle you. What is behind that door?" The older maid froze almost imperceptibly. Then she resumed folding linens near the fire. "Old rooms." "Whose?" Silence stretched too long. "Mrs. Alden." The woman sighed quietly without looking at her. "The late Duchess's private study." Seraphina stared toward the hidden door again. "Lucien's mother?" No. Cold moved slowly through the room despite the fire. Mrs. Alden finally lifted her eyes. Sympathy lived there now. Real sympathy. His wife. Seraphina felt the world tilt slightly beneath her feet. He was married? Mrs. Alden immediately looked regretful for speaking at all. "Miss, I should not have said. No one mentioned a wife. Most people here do not mention her at all." Seraphina looked back toward the locked door while unease curled tightly through her chest. A wife. Dead. Hidden behind locked rooms no one discussed openly. Suddenly Celeste's words downstairs returned sharply. "You should tell her before the house does. Blackmere never keeps secrets kindly." "What happened to her?" Seraphina whispered. Mrs. Alden's face lost all color. Truly lost it. "Please," she said quietly. "Do not ask questions like that where walls can hear." Fear moved visibly through the older woman now. Not ordinary servant caution. Genuine fear. Seraphina's pulse quickened. "Mrs. Alden." The maid stepped closer, lowering her voice almost to nothing. "There are parts of this house that still belong to grief," she whispered. "And grief listens." Then somewhere beyond the windows, a woman screamed. The sound tore through the frozen night so suddenly Seraphina nearly dropped the teacup in her hands. Both women froze. The scream came again. Faint, distant, echoing somewhere deep within Blackmere itself. Seraphina's heart slammed against her ribs. "Who was that?" she whispered. Mrs. Alden looked terrified now. "Stay inside your rooms tonight, miss," she said urgently. "And whatever happens, do not open that door." Then the older woman hurried from the suite fast enough to nearly forget the blankets entirely. Seraphina stood alone beside the fire, listening to the fading echoes of the scream disappear into the endless stone corridors of Blackmere. Then slowly, very slowly, she turned back toward the hidden door, and realized the handle was moving. The handle moved once. Slowly, deliberately. Seraphina stood frozen beside the fireplace while every instinct in her body screamed at her to step backward. The hidden door creaked open less than an inch before stopping abruptly against what sounded like a heavy chain on the other side. Silence followed. Thick, breathing silence. Then a woman's voice whispered through the narrow opening. "Who is there?" Seraphina's pulse stumbled hard against her ribs. The voice sounded fragile, young, exhausted in a way that felt older than age itself. "I am Seraphina Valewood," she answered carefully. "Who are you?" No answer came immediately. Wind rattled the tall windows overlooking the frozen cliffs. Somewhere far below, another warning bell echoed faintly through Blackmere. Finally the voice whispered softly, "You should not be here." Seraphina stepped closer despite herself. Mrs. Alden said these rooms belonged to the late Duchess. A long silence followed that. Then the woman behind the door laughed quietly. Not happy laughter, hollow laughter. "That is what they tell people now." Cold spread slowly beneath Seraphina's skin. "Who are you?" she repeated. The voice lowered further. "Someone Blackmere buried without a grave." Before Seraphina could speak again, footsteps echoed sharply from somewhere down the corridor outside her suite. Fast, purposeful. The woman behind the hidden door inhaled sharply. "Do not tell them you heard me," she whispered urgently. "Especially not him." Then the hidden door slammed shut hard enough to rattle the bookshelf beside it. A second later someone knocked firmly at the main entrance to Seraphina's rooms. She stared at the hidden door another heartbeat before forcing herself toward the sitting room. When she opened the main doors, Lucien stood there alone. Snow still dusted the shoulders of his black coat. Candlelight flickered across his sharp features while exhaustion carved deeper shadows beneath his pale eyes. He looked immediately past her into the room itself, assessing, watching, protecting. "The bell woke half the fortress," he said quietly. "I wanted to ensure you were unharmed." Seraphina studied him carefully. "And if I was not?" Lucien's expression remained unreadable. "Then someone else would be." The answer unsettled her because she believed him instantly. His gaze shifted briefly toward the hidden bookshelf before returning to her face. "You should lock your doors tonight." "Why?" "Because Blackmere is not safe." "For me specifically?" Lucien hesitated. "Too long. For everyone." Seraphina crossed her arms slowly. "That is becoming your favorite answer." Something flickered behind his eyes then, fatigue mixed with restraint. "You want honesty?" he asked quietly. "Fine. Yes. You are in danger specifically." The cold directness of it made her stomach tighten. "Because of your enemies?" "Because of my name, which apparently terrifies half the country." Lucien almost smiled at that. Almost. Only the intelligent half. Seraphina should have laughed. Instead she found herself studying the exhaustion hidden beneath his composure again. The stiffness in his leg had worsened noticeably since arriving at Blackmere. He stood carefully now, balanced more weight against the silver wolf cane than before. "You are hurt," she said suddenly. Lucien's jaw tightened immediately. "No, you are limping more. I have been traveling for 3 days through a blizzard." "That is not the same thing." His pale eyes sharpened slightly. "You observe too much. People survive by observing." Silence settled between them. Lucien looked at her differently after that. Not softer, more aware, like he had finally realized she was not fragile enough for the role everyone assigned her. A sudden gust of wind struck the windows hard enough to make the candles flicker violently. Lucien swayed almost imperceptibly. Seraphina noticed anyway. "Sit down," she said immediately. "I am fine." That was not a request. One dark eyebrow lifted faintly. "You give orders to a duke remarkably fast. You look like you are about to collapse remarkably fast." To her surprise, that nearly earned another smile. Nearly. Lucien exhaled quietly before lowering himself into the chair nearest the fireplace with obvious effort. Seraphina moved instinctively toward him before stopping halfway. This man frightened entire ballrooms. Yet right now he looked less dangerous than simply tired. "What happened to your leg?" she asked more gently. Lucien stared into the fire rather than at her face. Orange light moved across the scar along his jaw. "Winter campaign," he said after a long pause. 9 years ago. War. Something uglier. His hand tightened once against the head of the cane. The bone healed poorly. Seraphina noticed the way he avoided specifics. Not secrecy exactly. Habit. The kind soldiers carried home after surviving things ordinary people could not imagine. And the scars? She asked softly before she could stop herself. Lucien looked up at her then. Truly looked. The room seemed smaller suddenly beneath the weight of that gaze. You ask dangerous questions. You avoid simple answers. Another silence stretched between them. Fire cracked softly nearby. Snow whispered against the towering windows. Finally Lucien removed one glove slowly and flexed his scarred hand once as though pain lived permanently inside the joints. Most scars are simply proof someone survived, he said quietly. Seraphina looked down at his hand. Large. Scarred. Steady despite exhaustion. A soldier's hand. Not a nobleman's. And the others? She asked. Lucien's voice lowered almost to nothing. The others are proof they did not survive unchanged. The words settled heavily inside the room. Before Seraphina could answer, Lucien suddenly stiffened. His gaze dropped sharply toward the sleeve of his coat. Dark blood slowly spread through the black fabric near his ribs. Seraphina inhaled sharply. You are injured. It is nothing. That is literally blood. Lucien looked annoyed now. You should not sound so surprised. Someone shot at us 3 hours ago. And you said you were fine. I was attempting not to alarm you. That strategy failed. He closed his eyes briefly like a man already exhausted by the conversation itself. It is shallow. Take off the coat. His eyes opened again immediately. No. You are bleeding onto the furniture. The furniture has survived worse. Seraphina stepped closer before thinking too carefully about it. Lucien. The use of his first name changed something instantly. His gaze lifted slowly toward her face. The room became very quiet. Take off the coat, she repeated softly. For one long moment she genuinely thought he would refuse again. Then exhaustion finally won. Lucien unbuttoned the dark coat with stiff, controlled movements and set the cane aside carefully. The white shirt beneath had already soaked through with blood near his lower ribs. Seraphina's chest tightened. That is not shallow. Compared to previous attempts, it is practically polite. You joke strangely. I survive strangely too. She moved toward the wash basin near the fireplace without waiting for permission. Sit still. You assume I obey people often. Tonight you do. Lucien watched her silently while she soaked clean cloth in warm water with trembling fingers. She had never treated a gunshot wound before, but she had cleaned enough cuts and bruises on herself over the years to recognize when someone needed help despite pride insisting otherwise. When she returned beside the chair, Lucien had already loosened the top buttons of his shirt enough to expose the wound near his ribs. Seraphina stopped breathing for half a second. Scars crossed his skin everywhere. Thin white lines. Older wounds. Burn marks. Evidence of violence and survival written across the body of a man the world called untouchable. Lucien noticed her expression immediately. You can still leave, he said quietly. Most people do once they understand what Blackmere costs. Seraphina looked up at him then. Really looked. At the exhaustion beneath the power. The loneliness hidden beneath control. The pain he carried like another layer of clothing no one acknowledged anymore. No, she said softly. Lucien went still. Completely still. Seraphina carefully pressed the warm cloth against the wound near his ribs. His entire body tightened instantly beneath her hands, though he made no sound. That hurts, she murmured. Observant again. You are terrible at pretending otherwise. I have spent years pretending otherwise. She cleaned the wound slowly while snow continued falling outside Blackmere's towering windows. Neither of them spoke for several long minutes. The atmosphere inside the room changed quietly around them. Not safe. Never safe. But different. Softer in dangerous ways. Then Lucien suddenly reached out and caught her wrist gently. Seraphina froze instantly. His hand was warm despite the winter cold still clinging to his skin. Seraphina, he said quietly. Whatever you hear in this house, Whatever people tell you. His pale gray eyes held hers steadily. Do not open locked doors after midnight. A chill moved down her spine, because he sounded afraid. Not for himself, for her. Then from somewhere beyond the hidden bookshelf came 3 slow knocks against the wall. Lucien's entire expression darkened instantly. And for the first time since meeting him, Seraphina watched genuine fear enter the Duke of Blackmere's eyes. The knocking came again. 3 slow strikes against the hidden wall behind the bookshelf. Not loud. Somehow that made it worse. Lucien released Seraphina's wrist immediately and rose from the chair too fast for an injured man. Pain crossed his face like lightning before disappearing beneath control. The softness from moments earlier vanished completely. The Duke of Blackmere returned in its place. Cold, dangerous, untouchable. Stay here, he ordered quietly. Seraphina stared at him. Who is behind that door? Lucien ignored the question entirely. He reached for his coat with one hand while the other gripped the silver wolf cane hard enough for his knuckles to pale. Another 3 knocks echoed softly through the hidden wall. Lucien closed his eyes briefly. Not fear now. Frustration. Old exhaustion. It is late, he said tightly. Go to sleep, Seraphina. Someone is inside the walls whispering through locked doors and screaming in the middle of the night. I do not think sleep is realistic anymore. His jaw tightened. You are safer not knowing. Everyone here keeps saying that. Because everyone here remembers what happened when people knew too much. The words settled heavily between them. Seraphina watched him button his dark coat again over the fresh bandages she had wrapped around his ribs only minutes earlier. The sight irritated her unexpectedly. You should not be moving around after being shot. Lucien's pale eyes flicked toward her face. You sound concerned. You are bleeding on my carpet. That almost earned another smile. Almost. A faint sound interrupted them again. Not knocking this time. Breathing. Quiet breathing beyond the hidden wall. Seraphina felt every hair along her arms rise beneath her sleeves. Lucien heard it too. His entire body went still. Then slowly he crossed the room toward the hidden bookshelf. Lucien, Seraphina said carefully. Who is in there? He stopped directly before the concealed door without turning toward her. Candlelight stretched his shadow long across the floorboards. Someone I failed, he said quietly. Before she could ask another question, Lucien pressed one gloved hand flat against the hidden wood. Silence answered him from the other side. Then a woman's voice whispered faintly through the wall. You brought her here. Lucien lowered his head once. Yes. Why? The single word carried years of grief inside it. Lucien did not answer immediately. Seraphina watched tension move visibly through his shoulders. Because nowhere else was safe anymore. The woman behind the wall laughed softly. Broken laughter. Familiar now. You always say that before everything burns. Seraphina's stomach tightened painfully. Lucien's hand curled slowly against the hidden door. Go back to sleep, Evelyn. The name hit Seraphina like ice water. Evelyn. Not the late Duchess. Not some servant hidden away. A real woman. Alive. Silence stretched beyond the wall for several seconds. Then Evelyn whispered softly. She sounds kind. Lucien closed his eyes briefly. Do not do this tonight. Does she know what happened to me? Seraphina looked sharply toward him. Lucien's voice hardened instantly. Enough. The hidden room fell silent again. Complete silence this time. Lucien remained standing there another long moment before finally stepping away from the bookshelf. He looked exhausted beyond words now. Older somehow. Like the walls of Blackmere carried too much weight for one man to keep holding upright forever. Seraphina spoke carefully. Your wife is alive. Lucien stared toward the fire instead of her face. Yes. Everyone thinks she is dead. That was intentional. Why? His expression became unreadable again. Because some people are easier to protect when the world stops searching for them. Seraphina folded her arms tightly against herself. Protected from who? From me. The answer struck her silent. Lucien moved toward the windows overlooking the frozen cliffs and stood there with one hand braced against the glass. Snow drifted endlessly beyond him beneath the pale moonlight. "Evelyn was my wife," he said quietly. 5 years ago, Blackmere was attacked during winter negotiations with the Northern Territories. Seraphina listened without moving. "The attackers were looking for leverage," Lucian continued, "and I made the mistake of loving someone publicly." His voice remained calm, too calm, the kind of calm people learned only after surviving unbearable things. They killed 12 guards trying to reach her chambers. Afterward, Evelyn never fully returned. Seraphina's chest tightened slowly. "She is afraid of you?" No, Lucian's hand tightened against the window frame. "She is afraid of what loving me costs." Silence settled heavily through the room again. Seraphina suddenly understood Blackmere differently. The fear, the soldiers, the locked corridors, the warning bells. This was not simply a fortress. It was a wound still trying to close around shattered people. "Why tell everyone she died?" she asked softly. Lucian looked toward her then, pale eyes silver beneath the firelight. "Because enemies stop hunting ghosts eventually." "And does she know?" Something sharp moved briefly across his expression. "She was the one who asked me to bury her name." Seraphina felt grief move through the room like another living thing. Somewhere beyond the hidden wall, Evelyn remained silent, listening perhaps, existing behind locked doors while the world believed her dead. "That is cruel," Seraphina whispered before thinking better of it. Lucian nodded once immediately. Yes. No defense. No denial. Just acceptance. Somehow that hurt worse. Seraphina studied him quietly. The feared Duke of Blackmere. Powerful enough to silence ballrooms. Dangerous enough to terrify entire territories. Yet tonight he looked like a man standing in the ruins of things he could not save. "Then why bring me here?" she asked again, more softly this time. "If Blackmere destroys everyone close to you." Lucian's gaze held hers steadily. "Because someone already decided to destroy you first." The words settled deep inside her chest. Before Seraphina could respond, another sound echoed suddenly through the fortress. Not bells this time. Footsteps. Running footsteps. Fast. Urgent. A hard knock struck the main doors to her suite. Lucian turned instantly toward the sound. Every trace of exhaustion disappeared beneath sharp alertness. "Enter," he ordered. Mr. Loron pushed through the doors moments later, breathing harder than Seraphina had ever seen. Snow covered the shoulders of his dark coat. "Your Grace," he said urgently. "We found another body near the western cliffs." Seraphina froze. Lucian's expression did not change at all. Somehow that frightened her more. "Who?" he asked quietly. Mr. Loron hesitated. "One of the outer gate guards." Lucian's jaw tightened once. "And?" The steward swallowed hard. "He was carrying a letter addressed to Miss Valewood." Cold spread instantly through Seraphina's stomach. Lucian looked toward her slowly. The atmosphere inside the room changed at once. Not fear now. Certainty. Whatever hunted Blackmere had not followed her accidentally. It had come specifically for her. Mr. Loron pulled a sealed envelope from inside his coat with visibly trembling hands. Dark wax marked the front with an unfamiliar crest. A silver serpent curled around a crown. Lucian went completely still the moment he saw it. "Impossible," he whispered. Seraphina looked between them uneasily. "What is it?" Lucian took the letter carefully without breaking the seal. For the first time since meeting him, real anger entered his eyes. Cold, controlled, terrifying. "Someone from your past," he said quietly, "has finally found Blackmere." Lucian broke the seal without another word. The fire crackled softly behind him, while snow continued falling beyond the towering windows of Blackmere. Seraphina watched his face carefully as his eyes moved across the letter. Whatever he read there hardened something inside him immediately. Not surprise. Confirmation. "What does it say?" she asked quietly. Lucian folded the paper once before answering. "It says your aunt lied to you." Cold settled beneath Seraphina's ribs. "About what?" "About who your father really was." Mr. Laurent shut the doors carefully behind him while tension thickened through the room like approaching weather. Lucien handed the letter toward Seraphina at last. "Read it yourself." Her fingers trembled slightly as she accepted the paper. The handwriting was elegant, precise, expensive somehow. "Miss Valewood, if you are reading this, then Lucien Ashbourne has already done exactly what we feared he would. He has brought you to Blackmere. He has involved you in a war that destroyed every woman before you. Ask him why your father died 3 days after receiving a letter from Blackmere. Ask him why your family debts vanished temporarily the same week Lucien returned from the north. Ask him why men are suddenly killing to find you now. Some truths were buried for your protection. The Duke of Blackmere never leaves the dead buried for long." Seraphina finished reading slowly. The room felt colder afterward. She looked up at Lucien standing near the fireplace. "My father knew you." Lucien did not answer immediately. "Yes. You never said that. You never asked." Anger flashed suddenly through her chest. Sharp and immediate. "You purchased me at an auction." Her voice rose despite herself. "I did not realize I needed a formal interview process first." Mr. Laurent quietly moved toward the door. "Smart man." Lucien lifted one hand slightly without looking away from Seraphina. "Leave us." The steward obeyed instantly. Silence filled the room once the doors shut behind him. Seraphina stared at Lucien across the firelight and finally understood something terrifying. He had known her name before that ballroom, before the bidding, before the carriage. None of this had been coincidence. "Who was my father to you?" she asked softly now. Lucien looked exhausted again suddenly. The anger inside his eyes cooled into something older, sadder. "A good man," he said quietly, "which made him rare. That is not enough." Lucien walked slowly toward the windows overlooking the frozen cliffs. His limp had worsened again. Seraphina noticed he barely touched the cane now unless absolutely necessary. Pride, perhaps. Or habit. "10 years ago," he said at last, "your father saved my life during the Northern Campaign." Seraphina stared at him. "My father was a banker. Before that, he was military intelligence." The world tilted sideways beneath her feet. "No, yes." Lucien turned toward her slowly. "Thomas Valewood worked for the Crown during the border wars. Quietly, unofficially. He handled information too dangerous to exist on paper." Seraphina shook her head immediately. "My father hated politics. Your father hated what politics became." Lucien's voice lowered. "There is a difference." Seraphina tried desperately to connect this man speaking before her with the gentle father who taught her to read beside fireplaces and fed stray dogs beneath the kitchen steps. Impossible. "Why would he save you?" she whispered. Lucien looked toward the fire. "Because everyone else wanted me dead." The room fell silent again. Somewhere deep within Blackmere another bell rang faintly in the distance. "Your father hid me after the winter massacre," Lucien continued quietly. "I had been betrayed by my own command officers. Half my men were killed because someone sold our positions to northern mercenaries." His jaw tightened once. "Your father got me across the border alive." Seraphina swallowed hard. "And afterward?" "Afterward your father disappeared from military service entirely." Lucien's pale eyes lifted toward her. 3 months later someone tried to murder him in London." Ice spread slowly through her chest. "He never told me." "He was trying to protect you." The same words again. Everyone in Blackmere seemed to use protection like prayer. "From what?" she asked quietly. Lucien's expression darkened. "From the people who financed the massacre." Silence answered him. Seraphina looked down at the letter still trembling faintly in her hands. "And now they are looking for me?" "Yes." "Why?" Lucien moved closer slowly until only the fire separated them. "Because before your father died, he hid something." Her pulse quickened instantly. "What?" "That," Lucien said softly, "is what everyone is trying to kill for." Seraphina stared at him in disbelief. "You think I know where it is?" "No," his voice lowered further. "I think someone else believes you do." Fear finally arrived fully then. Not vague unease. Real fear. Cold and sharp beneath her skin. Lucien noticed immediately. Of course he did. He noticed everything. "Sit down," he said quietly. "I am fine. You are pale. I just discovered my dead father was secretly involved in military conspiracies, and apparently half the country wants something connected to him." Her voice shook despite her efforts. "Forgive me for needing a minute." Something shifted subtly in Lucien's expression then. Not pity. Understanding. He crossed toward the sideboard silently and poured water into a crystal glass before handing it to her. Seraphina accepted it reluctantly. Their fingers brushed for the briefest second. Warmth startled through her skin instantly. She hated noticing that too. "Did my father trust you?" she asked after a moment. Lucien answered without hesitation. "Yes. Should he have?" For the first time since meeting him, Lucien looked genuinely uncertain. The honesty of it hurt unexpectedly. Before either of them could speak again, another knock sounded at the main doors. 3 sharp strikes this time. Military precise. Lucien's entire posture changed instantly. "Enter." One of the fortress guards stepped inside quickly before bowing. "Your Grace, Lady Celeste requests your presence in the West Council chamber immediately." Lucien frowned. "Now?" "She said it concerns the northern envoys." A shadow crossed Lucien's face. "Fine." The guard hesitated before adding carefully, "There is another matter." "Speak." "The southern ballroom has been prepared for tomorrow evening." Seraphina looked up sharply. "Ballroom?" Lucien's expression hardened at once. "Who authorized that?" "Lady Celeste, Your Grace." The guard swallowed visibly. She invited several neighboring families already. Nobility from the Western Territories arrived before sunset. Lucien went still. Completely still. "Without my permission." "Yes, Your Grace." Seraphina suddenly understood before anyone explained. Public gathering. Nobles. Watching eyes. Evaluation. Humiliation waiting beneath expensive silk and candlelight. Lucien closed his eyes briefly like a man already exhausted by tomorrow. "Cancel it." The guard hesitated again. Dangerous hesitation. "Your Grace." "The guests are already here." Silence. Heavy silence. Lucien looked toward Seraphina slowly. Something unreadable moved behind his pale eyes. Calculation, perhaps. Or concern. "Then they will leave disappointed," he said coldly. A new voice interrupted from the doorway. "No," Celeste said calmly as she stepped into the room. "They will stay." She looked magnificent beneath the candlelight. Emerald silk. Black diamonds at her throat. Ice disguised as a woman. "The territories are already whispering about your mysterious bride," she continued coolly. "If you hide her now, they will smell weakness." Lucien's voice dropped dangerously soft. "I do not care what they smell." Celeste's gaze shifted briefly toward Seraphina. Assessing. Sharp. "You should." Her eyes returned to her brother. "Because one of tomorrow night's guests traveled here specifically to see whether the Duke of Blackmere truly married Thomas Valewood's daughter." Cold spread instantly through the room. Lucien's jaw tightened. "Who?" Celeste smiled faintly. "Beautiful and cruel. Lord Benedict Thornfield." Seraphina felt Lucien go still beside the fire. Not fear. Worse. Recognition. Old hatred. Celeste's voice lowered softly. "And according to the northern reports, he is bringing soldiers." Lucien did not speak for several seconds after Celeste said the name. The silence itself became dangerous. Seraphina watched the atmosphere inside the room tighten like wire pulled too far. Even the guard near the doorway lowered his eyes immediately. "No," Lucien said at last. Quietly. Celeste crossed farther into the room with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to surviving storms by becoming one herself. "You do not have the luxury of refusal anymore. Watch me." Benedict Thornfield traveled 600 miles through a blizzard because he believes something inside Blackmere belongs to him. Her gaze flicked briefly toward Seraphina. "And now he knows exactly where to look." Lucien's pale eyes darkened. "How much does he know?" "Enough." Celeste removed her gloves slowly, one finger at a time. The Southern Territories are already whispering about Thomas Valewood's daughter suddenly vanishing into Blackmere the same week Northern mercenaries began moving again. Seraphina felt her stomach tighten harder with every word. "You keep speaking as if I am some kind of object everyone wants," she said quietly. Celeste looked at her fully then for the first time. "No," her voice softened slightly. "You are the daughter of a man who died protecting something powerful enough to restart a war." Silence followed that. Lucien finally moved again, crossing toward the sideboard near the fireplace with controlled steps that still betrayed faint pain beneath the limp. He poured whiskey into a crystal glass but did not drink it immediately. "Tomorrow night changes nothing," he said coldly. "Seraphina will not attend." Celeste almost smiled. "That is exactly why she must." Lucien's grip tightened around the glass. "I will not parade her in front of vultures. You already dragged her into the sky above them." The words struck harder than shouting would have. Seraphina watched Lucien carefully. Every person inside Blackmere seemed afraid of him. Yet Celeste spoke to her brother like someone who had survived too much to fear anyone anymore. "If Seraphina hides now," Celeste continued, "the territories will assume weakness. Benedict will push harder. The council members will begin choosing sides. And your enemies will smell blood." Lucien looked exhausted suddenly. Not physically, spiritually, like this argument had existed for years beneath different faces and different wars. "What exactly happens at this gathering?" Seraphina asked quietly. Celeste's gaze shifted toward her again. "Politics disguised as dancing. And humiliation disguised as etiquette," Lucien added flatly. "That too." Seraphina crossed slowly toward the windows overlooking the frozen cliffs, while snow drifted endlessly beyond the glass. Somewhere below, soldiers carrying silver wolf banners moved across the courtyards beneath torchlight. Blackmere looked less like a home tonight and more like a fortress preparing for siege. "If I attend," she said carefully, "what will these people expect?" Celeste answered immediately. "Weakness." Lucien looked toward her sharply. "Celeste." "What?" "It is true." Her voice remained cool. "They expect a frightened girl purchased at auction by a crippled duke hiding behind old war stories." Seraphina glanced toward Lucien instinctively. His expression hardened instantly at the word crippled. Not wounded pride. Fury. Cold and absolute. Celeste noticed too. "See?" she murmured softly. "That is exactly why tomorrow matters." Lucien set the untouched whiskey glass down harder than intended. Crystal struck wood sharply through the room. "Enough." His voice dropped low enough to freeze the air itself. "Seraphina will not be used as bait. You already used her as protection." Silence crashed heavily between them. Seraphina looked slowly toward Lucien. Something flickered across his face, then vanished too quickly to fully read. Guilt, perhaps, or recognition. Celeste watched her brother carefully before speaking more quietly. "You think keeping her hidden will save her?" The bitterness in her voice deepened. "You said the same thing about Evelyn." Lucien went completely still. The room did too. Even the fire seemed quieter afterward. Celeste immediately looked away first. Regret flickered briefly across her sharp features. But the damage already existed now. Seraphina felt the grief beneath the silence like another person standing among them. "Leave us," Lucien said quietly. Not anger this time. Exhaustion. Celeste studied him one last moment before turning toward the door. "Tomorrow night decides more than you realize," she said softly without looking back. "And Benedict Thornfield never travels without a reason." Then she disappeared into the corridor beyond. The guard followed immediately. Silence returned once the doors closed. Heavy silence. Lucien remained beside the fireplace, staring into the flames without moving. Seraphina watched him carefully. The wound beneath his coat still bled faintly through the dark fabric despite his attempts to hide it. "She blames you," Seraphina said softly. Lucien laughed once under his breath. No humor in it. "So do I." The honesty of it unsettled her again. Most powerful men hid from guilt. Lucian carried his openly like another scar no one discussed. "What happened to Evelyn was not your fault," she said before thinking better of it. Lucian finally looked toward her then. "You do not know that. I know surviving something terrible does not automatically make you responsible for it." His pale eyes held hers steadily across the firelight. "That sounds like something experience taught you." Seraphina looked away first. "Experience teaches women many things." Silence stretched again afterward. Softer this time. Dangerous in different ways. Lucian crossed slowly toward the windows beside her. Up close she could see exhaustion pulling harder at the sharp lines of his face now. "You should sleep," he said quietly. "You keep saying that. Because tomorrow will be difficult." Seraphina folded her arms tightly against herself. "How many people at this gathering want you dead?" Lucian considered the question seriously. "Most of them." That is not reassuring. It was not intended to be. The faint dryness beneath his voice almost made her smile despite everything. Almost. Snow drifted heavily beyond the frozen cliffs while torchlight flickered far below across Blackmere's outer walls. Seraphina studied Lucian quietly beside her. The feared Duke of Blackmere. The wounded soldier hidden beneath elegant cruelty and old grief. The man who carried entire wars behind pale eyes and still remembered to choose white roses for her room. "Why did my father trust you?" she asked suddenly. Lucian looked toward the storm outside rather than at her. "Because once," he said quietly, "I gave him a reason to." "What reason?" His jaw tightened faintly. "Your father had enemies long before his death. Men who believed he knew where certain military records disappeared after the Winter Massacre." Seraphina felt cold move slowly beneath her skin. "The thing everyone is searching for now." "Yes. And?" Lucian's voice lowered almost to nothing. "One night those men came to your family estate while you were sleeping upstairs." Seraphina stopped breathing. "What?" Lucian finally looked directly at her. "Your father asked me to protect you if anything ever happened to him." The room seemed to tilt sideways around her. "You knew me before the auction." "Yes." "How long?" "Since you were 12. Shock moved through her chest so sharply she actually stepped backward. Lucian noticed immediately. Pain flickered briefly across his face before disappearing. "You watched me?" she whispered. "From a distance." "Why?" "Because your father was afraid." His voice remained calm. "And because he trusted very few people by the end." Seraphina stared at him beneath the firelight, unable to fully process what she was hearing. All those years. The strange feeling sometimes that someone stood just beyond crowded rooms watching carefully. The unexplained moments when debts disappeared briefly before returning. The anonymous flowers after her father's funeral. Her pulse quickened suddenly. "The white roses." Lucian looked faintly surprised. "You noticed. They arrived every year after my father died." Silence answered her. Lucian did not deny it. Something inside Seraphina shifted dangerously then. Not trust exactly. Worse, understanding. Before either of them could speak again, a sharp crack echoed suddenly from somewhere outside the fortress walls. Then another. Lucian's entire body tensed instantly. "Stay here." He moved toward the windows overlooking the southern courtyards while guards suddenly shouted somewhere below. Seraphina followed despite his command. Snow swirled violently across Blackmere's outer gates beneath the torchlight. Riders approached through the storm carrying black banners trimmed with silver serpents. Benedict Thornfield had arrived. And at the center of the approaching riders sat a man dressed entirely in white fur with a silver cane resting across his saddle. Even from this distance his smile looked cruel. Lucian's voice dropped low beside her. "Do not let him near you tomorrow." Seraphina looked toward the frozen rider approaching through the snow. "Why?" Lucian's pale eyes darkened completely. "Because Benedict Thornfield is the man who ordered your father killed." Seraphina did not sleep that night. Blackmere groaned around her like a living thing trapped beneath ice while snow buried the cliffs deeper beneath moonlight. Somewhere beyond the fortress walls, Benedict Thornfield waited with soldiers and silver serpent banners. And somewhere inside the hidden rooms behind her bookshelf, Lucien's first wife remained alive beneath a dead woman's name. By morning, the entire fortress had changed. Servants moved faster through the corridors. Guards doubled along the walls. Heavy iron gates remained sealed beneath layers of snow while horses stamped restlessly in the courtyards below. Blackmere was preparing for war again. Seraphina stood near the tall bedroom windows watching torchlight fade beneath the pale gray dawn when Mrs. Alden entered carrying 3 garment boxes. The older woman looked exhausted already. "Lady Celeste requested these for tonight," she said quietly. Seraphina turned slowly. "Tonight is still happening?" Mrs. Alden hesitated before nodding once. "Nothing stops politics, miss. Not even blizzards." The answer felt painfully true. 2 younger maids followed behind carrying velvet cases filled with jewelry. Diamonds, black pearls, silver combs shaped like wolves. Seraphina stared at the display uneasily. "I do not need any of this." Mrs. Alden offered a sad little smile. "At Blackmere, appearances are another kind of weapon." The words stayed with Seraphina long after the maids finished arranging gowns across the bed. Black silk, dark silver satin, deep midnight blue trimmed with crystals that caught the winter light like frost. None of it felt real. Less than a week ago she had stood on an auction platform while strangers debated her value over champagne. Now an entire fortress prepared to dress her like a duchess before powerful enemies. "Which one did Lucien choose?" she asked before thinking too carefully about the question. Mrs. Alden looked faintly surprised. Then she pointed toward the midnight blue gown quietly waiting near the fire. Seraphina's pulse moved strangely beneath her ribs. Of course he chose the simplest one, the least decorative, elegant without cruelty. "He notices everything," Mrs. Alden murmured softly while adjusting the sleeves. "That is what frightens people most." Before Seraphina could answer, another knock sounded at the suite doors. Mr. Laurent entered carrying a sealed envelope trimmed with black wax. "His Grace requests breakfast in the North Library." Something about the steward's expression looked careful again, measured, like the entire fortress had become aware something fragile was unfolding around its dangerous duke. Seraphina followed him through winding corridors lined with towering windows and endless portraits watching silently from stone walls. Outside, snowstorms battered Blackmere relentlessly. Inside, candlelight softened the sharp edges of old grief just enough for survival. "Does everyone here fear Benedict Thornfield?" she asked quietly while they descended a staircase overlooking the western courtyards. Mr. Laurent answered immediately. "No." Seraphina glanced toward him. "No, some fear him." The steward's voice lowered slightly. "Others remember him." Cold moved slowly beneath her skin. "What does that mean?" Mr. Laurent stopped briefly beside a massive iron door leading toward the library wing. "It means," he said carefully, "that Lord Thornfield once dined at this table like family." Then he opened the door before she could ask more. The North Library felt entirely different from the rest of Blackmere. Warmer somehow. Thousands of books stretched floor to ceiling beneath dark wooden balconies and towering ladders. Firelight glowed softly against leather bindings, while snow drifted beyond immense arched windows overlooking the frozen lake. Lucien stood near one of the shelves dressed entirely in black again. No formal coat today, just dark trousers and a white shirt partially hidden beneath a charcoal vest. Simpler clothing made him look more dangerous somehow. Less duke, more soldier. He glanced up the moment Seraphina entered. "You slept?" he asked quietly. "Not well." "Good." One dark eyebrow lifted slightly at her expression. "You approve of insomnia?" Lucien closed the book in his hands slowly. "People make fewer mistakes when they stay alert." Mr. Laurent quietly withdrew, leaving them alone among the towering shelves and firelight. Seraphina crossed farther into the library, studying Lucien carefully. His wound still bothered him. She could tell by the stiffness beneath otherwise controlled movements. But the exhaustion from last night seemed sharper now, like something else weighed against him beneath the approaching evening. Mr. Laurent said Benedict used to visit Blackmere. Lucien's jaw tightened immediately. "Years ago, before or after he had my father killed?" Silence. Fire crackled softly nearby. Lucien looked toward the frozen lake outside rather than at her face. Before, Seraphina folded her arms tightly against herself. Then why was he welcomed here at all? Lucien exhaled slowly through his nose. Because once I trusted him. The honesty of it unsettled her again. What changed? Lucien's pale eyes lifted toward her finally. War. He moved toward the long oak table near the fireplace where breakfast waited untouched beside stacks of documents and military maps spread beneath candlelight. Benedict and I served together during the northern campaigns. Seraphina sat slowly across from him. Friends. Something almost bitter crossed his expression. Brothers once. The room felt colder after that. Lucien poured coffee into porcelain cups with steady scarred hands, while snow battered the windows behind him. The winter massacre began because someone sold military routes to northern mercenaries. He continued quietly. Entire battalions walked directly into ambushes. Seraphina listened carefully. And Benedict was involved. Lucien's gaze darkened completely. Benedict organized it. Silence crashed between them. Seraphina looked at the man sitting across from her differently suddenly. Not merely dangerous. Betrayed. Deeply betrayed in ways still bleeding years later. How did you survive? She whispered. Lucien stared down into the untouched coffee for several seconds before answering. I was not supposed to. The simplicity of it hurt unexpectedly. Before Seraphina could respond, voices echoed faintly through the corridor beyond the library doors. Female voices, laughing softly. Lucien immediately looked irritated. Already, the doors opened moments later. Celeste swept inside dressed in dark emerald velvet with two noblewomen following behind her like decorative shadows. Both women immediately noticed Seraphina sitting across from Lucien at the breakfast table. Curiosity sharpened visibly beneath polite smiles. There you are, Celeste said smoothly. The Western families arrived earlier than expected. Lucien's expression hardened. You were told this gathering was unnecessary, and you were told hiding her would make things worse. Celeste's gaze moved toward Seraphina again. Which it already has. One of the noblewomen stepped forward gracefully. Blonde. Beautiful. Sharp-eyed beneath painted elegance. Lady Marian Winthrop. She introduced herself smoothly. I have heard fascinating things about you already. Seraphina immediately disliked her. That seems fast considering I arrived yesterday. Marian smiled faintly. Blackmere has never been good at keeping secrets. Lucien stood slowly from the table. The atmosphere changed at once. Lady Winthrop, he said quietly. You are forgetting yourself. Marian's smile faltered instantly. Seraphina noticed something important then. The entire room shifted around Lucien when he chose to command it. Not loudly, never loudly, but absolutely. Marian lowered her eyes immediately. Forgive me, Your Grace. Celeste watched the exchange with unreadable eyes. The ballroom preparations are nearly complete, she said calmly. And Benedict requested formal introductions before dinner. Lucien went still again. Denied. Lucien. Denied. His voice cut through the library like winter steel. Celeste sighed softly. You cannot shield her forever. Watch me try. The words arrived before he could soften them. Silence followed immediately afterward. Seraphina felt something dangerous move through her chest then. Not safety exactly. Worse, the desire to believe him. Lucien seemed to realize what he had said a second too late. He looked away first. Everyone leaves us, Celeste murmured quietly. Eventually. Her eyes flicked toward Seraphina with something almost like pity. Then she turned toward the noblewomen again. Come. We still have 600 candles to inspect before evening. The women withdrew quickly behind her. Marian glanced back once toward Lucien before disappearing into the corridor. Interested. Calculating. Seraphina noticed that too. Once the doors closed, silence returned to the library. Lucien remained standing near the table with one hand braced against the polished wood. You should not attend tonight, he said quietly. Seraphina looked toward him carefully. Because of Benedict? Because of all of them? He finally lifted his pale eyes toward her again. They will test you. How? By trying to humiliate you until you break. Strange calm settled through Seraphina then. Familiar calm. She had survived women like Aunt Agnes her entire life. Rich rooms and cruel smiles no longer frightened her the way they once had. And what happens if I do not break? She asked softly. Something unreadable flickered across Lucien's face. Respect, perhaps, or concern becoming something more dangerous. Then they will fear you instead. Before either of them could speak again, distant music drifted faintly upward through the fortress. Violins, piano. The ballroom musicians had arrived. Seraphina crossed slowly toward the towering library windows overlooking Blackmere's southern entrance. Below, servants carried crates of wine and flowers through the snow, while noble carriages rolled steadily toward the fortress gates. Candlelight already glowed faintly behind the ballroom windows despite the early afternoon hour. It feels like they are preparing for an execution, she whispered. Lucien moved beside her quietly. In a way, he said softly, they are. Seraphina looked up at him. Whose? Lucien's pale eyes fixed on the arriving black carriage carrying silver serpent banners through the storm below. Whoever loses tonight. By sunset, Blackmere no longer looked like a fortress preparing for war. It looked like a kingdom pretending war did not already live inside its walls. Thousands of candles burned across the southern ballroom beneath towering crystal chandeliers, while musicians played slow, elegant waltzes near the marble staircase. Nobles from every surrounding territory filled the vast room in silk and diamonds and carefully controlled smiles. Snowstorms raged outside the towering windows. Inside, politics wore perfume. Seraphina stood motionless before the mirror inside her suite while Mrs. Alden fastened the final silver clasp at the back of the midnight blue gown Lucien had chosen. Candlelight shimmered softly across the dark satin fabric. Simple, elegant, dangerous in its restraint. You look like Blackmere, Mrs. Alden murmured quietly. Seraphina met the older woman's eyes in the mirror. That does not sound comforting. A faint smile touched the maid's tired face. It was not meant to. The gown fit perfectly. Of course it did. Lucien apparently noticed everything. Silver embroidery traced delicate patterns along the sleeves like frost spreading across winter glass. Black diamonds rested at her throat beneath candlelight. Nothing excessive. Nothing soft. The woman reflected in the mirror no longer looked like the frightened girl sold at auction in London. She looked like someone colder. Someone learning survival differently. His Grace requested this for you. Mrs. Alden carefully handed her a pair of long black gloves lined with silver stitching. Seraphina touched the soft fabric slowly. Why? The older woman hesitated before answering. Because every Duchess of Blackmere wears black when entering war. Cold moved softly beneath Seraphina's ribs. Before she could speak again, another knock sounded at the suite doors. Mr. Laurent entered with his usual measured calm, though tension shadowed his face tonight. Miss Valewood. His eyes briefly softened at the sight of her. His Grace is waiting. Seraphina followed him through candlelit corridors crowded now with distant music and noble laughter drifting upward from below. Everywhere servants moved quickly carrying crystal trays and silver pitchers while guards lined every entrance beneath silver wolf banners. Blackmere had transformed into performance. But the fear underneath still remained. She could feel it in the walls. Has Benedict arrived? She asked quietly. Mr. Laurent nodded once. An hour ago. And, the steward's jaw tightened. He brought 40 riders despite claiming peaceful intentions. Seraphina looked toward the towering windows where snow lashed against the glass like thrown salt. Does Lucien expect trouble tonight? Mr. Laurent glanced toward her carefully. His Grace expects trouble every night. They reached the grand staircase overlooking the southern ballroom moments later. Music drifted upward beneath waves of conversation and candlelight. Seraphina stopped breathing briefly at the sight below. Hundreds of nobles moved across polished marble floors beneath gold chandeliers and endless mirrors reflecting firelight in every direction. Women glittered beneath diamonds. Men watched each other over crystal glasses with smiles sharp enough to cut skin. And at the far end of the ballroom, near the enormous black fireplace, stood Benedict Thornfield. Even across the crowded room he looked dangerous. White fur lined the shoulders of his dark coat, while silver rings gleamed against elegant fingers wrapped around a cane carved from ivory. Beautiful in the way poisonous things were beautiful. His pale blonde hair reflected candlelight almost softly. But his smile never reached his eyes. Those eyes moved across the ballroom lazily until they found Seraphina standing at the top of the staircase. Then he smiled wider. "Do not react," Lucien's voice said quietly beside her. Seraphina turned sharply. He stood there dressed entirely in black formalwear trimmed with silver embroidery. No crown. No decoration beyond the silver wolf pin at his throat. He did not need them. The ballroom already bent around his presence like grass before storms. "You disappeared," she whispered. Lucien's pale eyes remained fixed on Benedict below. "I had security matters to resolve. And they are unresolved." The honesty of it should have frightened her more. Instead, she found herself watching the tension hidden beneath his composure. The wound near his ribs still hurt him. She could tell by the stiffness beneath otherwise controlled posture. Yet he stood there anyway, prepared to face enemies with an entire ballroom watching. "You should not have come tonight," he said quietly without looking at her. "You already said that." "I meant it more now." Seraphina followed his gaze toward Benedict again. "What happens if I leave?" Lucien's expression hardened faintly. "Then Benedict wins before the game begins." Silence settled briefly between them while music floated upward beneath the chandeliers. Finally Seraphina slowly pulled on the black gloves Lucien had chosen for her. "Then I suppose we should not let him win." Something unreadable crossed Lucien's face then. Respect, perhaps. Or concern becoming dangerously close to admiration. He offered his arm silently. Seraphina hesitated only one heartbeat before placing her hand against it. Warmth moved through the black fabric instantly. Then together they descended the staircase into the ballroom. Conversation faded gradually around them. Not immediately. More dangerous than that. Like waves retreating before storms. One by one nobles turned toward the staircase. Toward Lucien. Toward the unknown woman beside him wearing midnight blue and silver frost beneath Blackmere chandeliers. Seraphina felt hundreds of eyes move across her skin. Measuring. Judging. Waiting for weakness. Lucien's voice lowered almost too softly to hear. "Do not bow to anyone tonight." "Why?" "Because Blackmere bows to no one." They reached the ballroom floor together. Silence spread wider now. Musicians faltered briefly before recovering the melody. Nobles stepped aside instinctively as Lucien guided her through the crowd. No one touched him. No one blocked his path. Fear moved elegantly through this room disguised as respect. "Your Grace." Various voices murmured quietly as they passed. Lucien acknowledged almost none of them. Seraphina noticed something else too. The nobles did not look at Lucien with simple fear. They looked at him like survivors watching the man who walked out of fire while others burned. Then Benedict Thornfield approached. The ballroom itself seemed to tighten. He moved gracefully despite the silver cane resting against one gloved hand. Handsome, charming, deadly beneath the surface. His smile warmed instantly as he stopped before them. "Lucien," Benedict said smoothly. "Still terrifying ballrooms after all these years. Some traditions survive everything." Lucien's expression remained carved from ice. "Benedict." Benedict's pale eyes shifted toward Seraphina slowly. "And this must be Thomas Valewood's daughter." The way he said her father's name made Seraphina's stomach turn cold. "Miss Valewood," Benedict continued softly. "Or should I say Duchess already?" Lucien's voice cut through the tension immediately. "You should say nothing unnecessary." Benedict laughed lightly beneath the chandeliers. Still protective. Fascinating. His eyes returned to Seraphina. "Your father once punched me in the face during a military council meeting." The ballroom listened carefully now without pretending otherwise. "I liked him enormously afterward." Seraphina stared at the man standing before her. The man Lucian believed responsible for her father's death. Yet Benedict smiled with such easy elegance it almost disguised the danger completely. Almost. "You knew my father well?" she asked carefully. Benedict tilted his head slightly. "Well enough to know he should have trusted me instead." Lucian stepped subtly closer beside her. "Not possessive. Protective. Careful," he said quietly. Benedict's smile widened. "There he is." He leaned slightly against the silver cane. "I was beginning to miss the version of you that threatened people with your voice alone. And I was beginning to enjoy your silence." A few nearby nobles immediately looked away, pretending not to hear. Benedict merely laughed again. "Relax, old friend. I came peacefully." Lucian's pale eyes darkened completely. "You brought soldiers. You built a fortress." Silence. Dangerous silence. Benedict finally turned fully toward Seraphina again. "Tell me," he said softly, "did Lucian mention how your father really died?" Lucian's voice dropped low enough to freeze the ballroom itself. "Enough." Benedict ignored him entirely. "Thomas Valewood did not die from illness, Miss Valewood." The music nearby faltered again. "He died protecting a list of names powerful men were willing to kill for." Seraphina felt the room tilt slightly beneath her feet. Benedict watched her carefully, calculating, patient. "And according to certain rumors," he added quietly, "your father hid that list before he died." Lucian stepped between them slightly. "You are done speaking to her." Benedict's pale eyes lifted slowly toward Lucian's face. The smile vanished completely now. Coldness remained beneath it, ancient and sharp. "No," he said softly, "I do not think I am." Then from somewhere above the ballroom, glass shattered violently. Every noble froze instantly. A second later, one of Blackmere's warning bells began ringing through the fortress again. And somewhere deep inside the crowd, a woman screamed Lucian's name. The scream came from the second-floor balcony overlooking the ballroom. Every head turned upward at once beneath the chandeliers while the warning bell echoed violently through Blackmere. A woman stood near the shattered window, gripping the marble railing with trembling hands. White nightgown, loose dark hair, pale terrified eyes. Evelyn. The entire ballroom froze in horror. Benedict Thornfield's smile vanished instantly. Lucian stopped breathing for half a second beside Seraphina. Then everything moved at once. Guards rushed toward the staircase. Nobles erupted into frightened whispers. Musicians abandoned their instruments entirely. But Evelyn only stared downward into the crowded ballroom until her eyes found Lucian standing below. "They are inside the walls," she whispered weakly. Then she collapsed. Lucian moved before anyone else. Faster than thought. Faster than pain should have allowed. The silver wolf cane struck marble once before he abandoned it entirely and crossed the ballroom through terrified nobles scattering from his path. Seraphina followed instinctively despite the chaos erupting around them. "Lucian," Celeste called sharply somewhere behind them, "the west corridors are breached." Lucian did not slow. Soldiers thundered past carrying rifles and lanterns, while warning bells screamed through the fortress overhead. Blackmere no longer pretended tonight. War had arrived openly now. Seraphina reached the staircase just behind Lucian, as he lifted Evelyn carefully from the marble floor outside the shattered balcony doors. The woman looked fragile beneath the candlelight, smaller than Seraphina expected. Bruises of exhaustion darkened the skin beneath hollow eyes. She clutched Lucian's coat weakly with trembling fingers. "I heard them," Evelyn whispered. "They are searching the hidden archives." Lucian's face hardened instantly. "How many?" "At least 4. Her frightened gaze suddenly shifted toward Seraphina standing nearby. "You should not have brought her here." Pain crossed Lucian's expression before he could hide it. "I know." The honesty of it hit Seraphina harder than anger would have. Before anyone could speak again, another distant crash echoed through the fortress, followed by shouting somewhere below. One of the guards rushed toward Lucian, breathing hard. "Your Grace." Someone forced entry into the lower records chamber. Lucien carefully helped Evelyn towards Celeste, who had just arrived at the balcony surrounded by armed guards. "Take her to the North Tower," he ordered quietly. Celeste nodded immediately, though fear sharpened her usual cold composure. "And you?" Lucien's pale eyes darkened completely. "I finished this." Then he turned sharply toward the western corridors. Seraphina grabbed his sleeve before he could disappear into the chaos. "You are injured." Lucien looked down at her hand against his arm. The entire fortress seemed to disappear briefly around them. "So are you," he said softly. Seraphina frowned in confusion until she followed his gaze downward. Blood stained one black glove near her wrist. Not hers. Lucien's wound had reopened badly during the rush upstairs. "Lucien." His expression softened unexpectedly then. Dangerous softness. The kind that ruined people faster than cruelty. "Stay with Celeste," he said quietly. No, one dark eyebrow lifted faintly despite everything. "No? You said people are searching for something my father hid." Seraphina stepped closer, lowering her voice. "If they breach the archives, they may find it first." Lucien studied her silently beneath the flickering corridor lanterns while chaos roared deeper through Blackmere. Finally he exhaled slowly. "You are impossible. You brought me to a fortress full of assassins and secrets. You lost the right to expect obedience." For the first time all evening, real amusement flickered briefly across his exhausted face. Tiny. Gone almost instantly, but real. Then another gunshot echoed somewhere below. Lucien's expression sharpened again immediately. "Stay behind me," he ordered. "I mean it." Together they moved through the western corridors while guards rushed past carrying rifles and lanterns through smoke-filled hallways. Blackmere groaned around them beneath screaming wind and warning bells. Somewhere deeper inside the fortress, men shouted over crashing furniture and pounding footsteps. The hidden war inside Blackmere had finally exploded into the open. "The archives are beneath the old chapel," Lucien said quickly while leading her down a narrow stone staircase lit only by torchlight. "If Benedict reaches those records first." "What exactly is hidden there?" Lucien's jaw tightened once. "Names." "What names?" "The men responsible for the Winter Massacre." Cold moved sharply through Seraphina's chest. "My father had proof." "Yes." Lucien descended another staircase with visible pain now. The wound beneath his ribs bled steadily through the black formal coat. Yet he never slowed. "Thomas Valewood copied the original military ledger before his death," he continued quietly. "Every bribe, every betrayal, every officer who sold soldiers for profit." Seraphina stared at him. "And Benedict wants that destroyed. Benedict wants power." Lucien's voice hardened. "Destroying the ledger simply protects it." They reached a massive iron door hidden beneath the fortress chapel moments later. Two guards already stood waiting there with rifles raised. "Your Grace," one said urgently. They escaped deeper into the lower tunnels. Lucien nodded once sharply before turning toward Seraphina. "Stay here." "Absolutely not." "Seraphina, I am tired of hidden rooms and half-truths." Her voice lowered. "If my father died protecting something beneath Blackmere, then I deserve to see it." Lucien stared at her for one long dangerous second. Then finally he stepped aside. "Fine." He unlocked the massive iron door himself. Ancient hinges groaned open, revealing darkness beyond. The hidden archive chamber stretched beneath the fortress like a buried cathedral. Endless shelves filled with leather ledgers and sealed military documents disappeared into shadows beneath arched stone ceilings. Dust floated through lantern light. The entire room smelled like old paper and secrets buried too long. Seraphina stepped slowly inside. "My God!" Lucien moved carefully through the rows of shelves, scanning the room with cold, precise focus. "Your father helped build this archive after the war." Seraphina trailed her fingers lightly across one dusty shelf. "Why keep records this dangerous?" Lucien's pale eyes lifted toward her. "Because history becomes weapons when only monsters survive to tell it." The words settled heavily through the chamber. Then suddenly one of the guards shouted from farther down the corridor. "Movement!" Everything happened at once afterward. Footsteps echoed through the lower tunnels. Lantern light flickered wildly against stone walls. Lucien shoved Seraphina sharply behind one of the towering shelves just as another shot rang out somewhere nearby. Dust exploded from ancient stone overhead. Seraphina's pulse slammed painfully against her ribs. Lucien drew his pistol instantly while the guards moved toward the tunnel entrance. "Stay down," he ordered without looking back. More shouting followed from deeper within the tunnels. Then silence. Thick, terrifying silence. Lucien listened carefully. Every muscle in his body tightened beneath the black coat already stained dark with blood. "Too quiet," he murmured. Suddenly another voice echoed calmly through the archive chamber itself. "Still dramatic after all these years, Lucien." Benedict Thornfield stepped from the shadows between the shelves carrying a lantern in one hand and his silver cane in the other. Snow melted slowly from the shoulders of his white fur coat. He looked entirely calm, almost amused. Lucien raised the pistol immediately. "You should have stayed in the ballroom." Benedict smiled faintly. "And miss finally seeing the famous archives?" His pale eyes shifted toward Seraphina hidden beside the shelves. "Miss Valewood." Seraphina felt ice crawl beneath her skin. Benedict looked at her almost kindly. That frightened her most. "Your father was a brilliant man," he said softly. "Tragic that loyalty made him so foolish." Lucien's voice dropped dangerously low. "One more word." Benedict ignored him completely. "Did Lucien tell you the truth yet?" he asked Seraphina gently. "About why your father really died?" Lucien fired the pistol into the stone beside Benedict hard enough to shower sparks across the archives. Nobles upstairs screamed faintly through the distant floors. Benedict only sighed softly. "Still emotional where she is concerned." "Fascinating." His pale gaze returned toward Seraphina. "Thomas Valewood was not murdered because of the ledger alone." Silence stretched painfully tight through the chamber. "He died," Benedict continued softly, "because he discovered who truly betrayed Lucien during the winter massacre." Seraphina looked sharply toward Lucien. Something changed in his expression then. Not anger. Fear. Real fear. Benedict smiled slowly, cruelly. "Tell her," he whispered. Lucien's jaw tightened hard enough to hurt. "Leave her out of this. You already dragged her into it." Benedict's voice sharpened suddenly for the first time. "Just like you dragged Evelyn into your wars." The words hit like knives through silence. Lucien went completely still. Benedict stepped closer through the shadows between shelves. "Thomas Valewood died protecting your name, Lucien." Seraphina stopped breathing. "What?" Benedict's pale eyes never left Lucien's face. "Because the man responsible for the winter massacre was never me." Silence crashed through the archive chamber. Even the wind outside seemed to disappear. Benedict smiled coldly beneath the lantern light. "It was your father." Silence swallowed the archive chamber completely after Benedict spoke those words. The lantern light flickered weakly across endless shelves of buried secrets, while snowstorms battered the fortress above them. Seraphina stared at Lucien, unable to breathe properly. His father. The winter massacre. Betrayal. Nothing inside Blackmere remained stable anymore. Lucien did not lower the pistol aimed directly at Benedict's chest. But something inside his expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. Old pain dragged back into open air. Benedict watched him carefully beneath the shadows between shelves. "There it is," he murmured softly. "That look." Seraphina turned sharply toward Lucien. "Tell me he is lying." Lucien's pale eyes never left Benedict. "My father signed the orders," he said quietly. The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Seraphina felt the room tilt dangerously beneath her feet. Benedict smiled faintly. "Victorious." Arthur Ashbourne sold military routes to northern mercenaries for land and titles. Hundreds died because of it. His voice sharpened, including half the men Lucien commanded personally. Lucien's hand tightened around the pistol hard enough for the scarred knuckles to pale. "Enough." Benedict ignored him completely. Thomas Valewood discovered the truth afterward while helping clean the military archives. His pale eyes shifted toward Seraphina again. Your father realized the crown intended to bury the scandal quietly to avoid destroying the Ashbourne bloodline. Cold spread through Seraphina's chest. No, Benedict's smile vanished entirely now. Your father threatened to expose everyone involved, including Lucien. Silence. Lucien finally lowered the pistol slowly. Not surrender. Exhaustion. Ancient exhaustion settling into old wounds. My father confessed before he died, he said quietly. 3 months after the massacre. Seraphina stared at him. And you hid it? Lucien's jaw tightened painfully. I inherited Blackmere at 29 years old, with half the northern territories demanding executions. His voice lowered further. If the truth became public then, civil war would have followed. Benedict laughed sharply beneath the lantern light. So noble. Enough. The command cracked through the archive chamber like thunder. Real fury entered Lucien's voice for the first time since Seraphina met him. Even Benedict stilled briefly beneath it. Lucien stepped forward slowly through the shadows between shelves despite blood staining the front of his black coat. You do not get to stand here pretending innocence. Benedict's pale eyes narrowed. I did not betray the routes. No, Lucien's expression hardened into something terrifyingly calm. You simply profited afterward. Silence. Dangerous silence. Seraphina looked between them, realizing suddenly that both men carried different pieces of the same nightmare. Lucien inherited guilt that never belonged to him. Benedict inherited ambition sharp enough to feed on disaster. Your father planned to release the ledger publicly, Benedict said quietly toward Seraphina. That is why he died. Lucien's gaze darkened completely. You sent the men after him. Benedict smiled coldly. Your father ordered the first betrayal. I merely survived the aftermath better than everyone else. Before Lucien could respond, another explosion echoed somewhere above the archives, hard enough to shake dust from the stone ceilings. Shouting followed immediately, guards yelling, running footsteps. Blackmere itself trembled beneath the storm. One of the soldiers rushed into the chamber moments later, breathing hard. Your Grace, the western gates are collapsing. Lucien closed his eyes briefly. Exhaustion crossed his face like a shadow. Then it vanished again beneath absolute control. Evacuate the ballroom guests through the north corridors, he ordered immediately. Seal the eastern towers. The guard hesitated. And Lord Thornfield? Lucien's pale eyes lifted slowly toward Benedict. He stays with me. Benedict laughed softly. Still dramatic to the end. Seraphina stepped forward suddenly before either man could move again. Stop. Both men looked toward her. This entire fortress is collapsing around us because powerful men keep protecting their pride instead of the truth. Her voice shook despite her efforts. My father died because he tried to expose monsters, not because he wanted revenge. Silence followed her words. Lucien watched her carefully. Benedict too. The ledger, Seraphina said quietly. Where is it? Lucien's expression shifted faintly. Seraphina. Where? He hesitated, only one heartbeat too long. Seraphina understood instantly. You know. Lucien looked exhausted suddenly in ways deeper than physical pain. Your father gave it to me before he died. Benedict's smile disappeared completely. What? Lucien's voice lowered into cold iron. Thomas Valewood trusted me to release the truth when the territories were stable enough to survive it. Benedict stepped forward sharply. You lying bastard. Lucien ignored him entirely. His pale eyes remained fixed on Seraphina now. I kept the ledger hidden because your father believed exposing it too early would destroy thousands more lives. Pain moved across Lucien's face then. Real pain. But he made me promise one thing. Seraphina's pulse quickened painfully. What? Lucien looked at her like a man standing at the edge of something irreversible. That if anything happened to him, I would protect you before the truth. Silence swallowed the chamber. Every strange moment suddenly rearranged itself inside Seraphina's mind. The anonymous flowers, the disappearing debts, the auction, Blackmere. None of it had been coincidence. Lucien had spent years keeping a promise to a dying man. Benedict's voice cut sharply through the silence. Touching. His pale eyes hardened dangerously. Unfortunately, I am done waiting for sentiment. He lifted the silver cane suddenly. A hidden blade slid free beneath the lantern light. Guards immediately raised rifles. Lucien moved instinctively in front of Seraphina before anyone else could react. Protective. Absolute. Benedict's expression twisted faintly at the sight. There it is again, he murmured coldly. That weakness. Lucien's voice lowered into something deadly calm. You mistake loyalty for weakness because no one ever taught you the difference. Then everything exploded into motion. More guards flooded the archive tunnels from behind Benedict while soldiers loyal to Blackmere rushed from the opposite corridor. Shouting echoed violently beneath the stone ceilings. Lanterns crashed. Smoke thickened through the chamber. Seraphina stumbled backward against the shelves as chaos swallowed the archives entirely. Lucien grabbed her wrist, instantly pulling her behind him, while guards surged toward Benedict through the smoke. Stay with me, he ordered sharply. Benedict backed toward the collapsing tunnel entrance, still gripping the silver blade hidden inside the cane. This changes nothing, he called coldly through the chaos. The territories will still tear Blackmere apart once the truth spreads. Lucien's pale eyes looked almost silver beneath the smoke and lantern fire. Then let them try. The certainty in his voice silenced even the guards briefly. Benedict stared at Lucien another long second before finally retreating into the smoke-filled tunnels with several soldiers surrounding him. The moment he vanished, part of the archive ceiling collapsed somewhere deeper below. Stone thundered against stone. Dust exploded through the chamber. Your Grace! One guard shouted urgently. The tunnels are failing. Lucien immediately turned toward Seraphina. Blood ran visibly down the front of his black coat now from the reopened wound beneath his ribs. We are leaving. Lucien. Now. He guided her quickly through collapsing corridors while Blackmere shook violently overhead. Somewhere above them bells still screamed through the fortress while frightened nobles evacuated through snowstorms and shattered gates. Yet through all the chaos, Lucien never released her hand once. They finally emerged into the main southern hall beneath towering chandeliers where soldiers rushed in every direction carrying rifles and lanterns through smoke and falling ash from broken walls. Celeste appeared immediately the moment she saw them. The western towers are burning, she said sharply. Then her eyes caught the blood soaking Lucien's coat. God! Lucien ignored the concern entirely. Get everyone to the northern cliffs. Now. Celeste nodded once before rushing away, barking orders toward the remaining guards. Seraphina turned toward Lucien immediately. You need a physician. Later. You are bleeding. Later. His voice weakened slightly on the second word. Seraphina grabbed his arm before he could continue walking. Stop pretending you are made of stone. Lucien finally looked down at her. Really looked. The firelight from collapsing chandeliers reflected across pale, exhausted eyes carrying years of grief and war and promises that nearly destroyed him. Seraphina, he said quietly. Blackmere may not survive tonight. Her chest tightened painfully. Then we rebuild it. Something changed in his expression then. Something fragile and dangerous. Hope perhaps. The thing he trusted least. Another explosion echoed somewhere above them. Dust rained from the ceiling. Lucien swayed slightly this time before catching himself against the wall. Seraphina stepped closer instinctively. Enough. Her voice softened. Lean on me for once. Silence stretched between them while chaos roared through the fortress around them. Then slowly, very slowly, Lucien Ashbourne allowed part of his weight to rest against her. Not because he was weak. Because he was finally too tired to stand alone anymore. Seraphina wrapped one arm carefully around him while smoke drifted through the shattered halls of Blackmere. Together they moved toward the northern exits beneath screaming wind and warning bells and collapsing stone. And for the first time since arriving at the fortress, Seraphina understood the truth completely. The most dangerous thing about the Duke of Blackmere was never his power. It was the fact that beneath all the scars and silence and war, he still knew how to love people enough to destroy himself protecting them.